Good evening. I am Caress Clegg, and this is Brandon Shope. We are with New Hanover County Schools Communication Division. Tonight, we have with us Assistant Superintendent of Student Support Services, Julie Varnum. Ms. Varnum works on the Health Work Group that is tasked with school reopenings under Plans B and C.
And now Ms. Farnham is going to be answering questions that the work group has addressed at the district level regarding instruction under both plans. Questions that are still under discussion will be taken back to the work group for consideration, and responses will be shared by the Latino Alliance and the school district at nhcs.net. Now, as a reminder, areas of concern for this work group include special education, social and emotional resources, student and staff health and safety.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Varnum, for being with us this evening. Always good to have a conversation with you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So will you start off just by telling us a little bit about what discussions are happening within your work group right now?
Yes. So like you said, the health work group is really focused on the preparations for opening school and opening for face-to-face learning. But we also know that we have to put several precautions and strategies in place, problem solve some of the other concerns around bringing staff in the building. So we've been working for a good while on answering 4 essential questions. One, how are staffing needs and impact identified and addressed? How are vulnerable students and staff supported? When, how, and by whom does screening occur, health screening occur? And how will students and staff that exhibit symptoms at screening or during the school day be supported, and by whom? And so we've taken those 4 questions and really drilled down to the most discrete level, trying to provide some protocols and some guidance for our school teams.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Ms. Farnham. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about what does special education look like under plans both B and C?
Right. So I want to start by saying that the instructional model that we have right now is the best we can have at the moment due to the public health concerns. This is not a strong replacement or what we would even call a positive or good alternative to face-to-face instruction for students, and especially students with special needs. So right now, students that already have an identified special need and they are served through an individualized education plan or an IEP, have their services on their plan, and then the school teams, the IEP teams, are working with parents to determine what those supports need to look like right now. How does that specially designed instruction get delivered in a remote setting? And for some students, it's just a location change. They are still participating in their live instruction. They're still participating in a small group via Zoom or their other learning management system like Google Classroom or Canvas or Seesaw. But for some of our most vulnerable students with more significant disabilities that might involve intellectual disabilities or even physical disabilities, they're having a lot of difficulty accessing their instruction in a remote format. And we are cognizant of that. We are conscious of the importance of putting our health and safety plans in place so that we can bring those kids back into the school setting and really have appropriate instruction, more appropriate instruction ready for them. So honestly, it's kind of difficult to say that, every kid's plan is going to be very different, but every plan has to be related to that student's unique and special needs. And then what's the best way we can deliver in the meantime under Plan C, because I like Plan C to be kind of considered to be in the meantime, because it's not our goal, and it's really not okay for a long-term instructional approach for the majority of our students. So I think it can look very different. For some, their teacher is working with them in live or synchronous learning sessions. And for some, they might have manipulatives or task boxes or work boxes or other self-care tasks that is honestly requiring a lot of support of their daytime caregivers, whether it's our parents, whether it's grandparents, whether it's, an aunt and uncle, a child care provider. And we realize this. We do not want this to go any longer than it absolutely has to, for us to be prepared to bring our students in and again, return to their face-to-face instruction where their materials are there, their trained staff are there, and they are getting that whole child approach, all of the related services and other structures and supports that they do require.
Thank you, Ms. Farnham, for sharing. You mentioned that Plan C is not the goal and it's not where we want to stay. And we have that desire to move into Plan B when feasible. So under Plan B, will students who experience great challenges with remote learning be allowed to come in and have that face-to-face learning daily, or will all of our students have to have that 1 week on, 2 weeks off rotation?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that, Caress. I think it would probably be helpful to kind of discuss about the range of students with disabilities. So the majority of our students with disabilities are not in low incidence populations, meaning, the majority have learning and processing difficulties, maybe some academic difficulties, sometimes what we call splintered skills or prerequisite skill deficits. And they do need a lot of support with, with content areas like reading and math and written language. And then other of our students with disabilities might have more compounded or situations that make them much more vulnerable to being in a traditional classroom setting, what we call every ed setting. I don't really like to talk about general education and special education kind of separately because, we've got kids that need special education and then we have every education. And so, of course, we look for every opportunity to include students with disabilities in that every education classroom setting, that typical 3rd grade, 4th grade, 7th grade classroom. So for those students that are participating along with typical peers much more of their day, they may very well be adequately and nearly appropriately served in that 1/3 schedule, that 1 week off and that 1 week on and the 2 weeks off. So we want to make sure that we prioritize to bring in on a more frequent basis those students who have low incidence disabilities, such as a significant disability such as blindness, deaf or hard of hearing, some students with a significant autism that interferes with their ability to connect with remote learning, and other significant communication disabilities. Also, our students that have more global delays that really affects their intellectual performance, and then might also have more physical or medical needs. In looking at that continuum, we're much more likely to find that we need to bring in more frequently than just 1 week of 3, those students with those global delays, where their ability to interact and access remote instruction is rather non-existent. If they are mainly working with manipulatives, mainly require, that smaller classroom setting, that separate classroom setting where you might have 6, 8, 9, 10 kids and 2, 3, 4, 5 staff to really support them in, immediate modeling of tasks that have to be completed, supporting their mobility around the building, supporting their communication. And we're not talking about those students who can jump onto a Zoom session, even though it might be frustrating and it's not the same. We're talking about a very different level of disability. And so we're not going to be able to bring every child in that doesn't learn typically, but we have to focus on more face-to-face instruction, more than 1 week of 3 for those with the most significant global delays. And that's not going to be a decision that is just a line of, everyone with this intellectual ability comes in and everyone that doesn't meet that threshold doesn't. These are going to have to be determined on a case-by-case basis. And, we have more than 3,000 students with disabilities that require special education service in our school system. All 3,000, around 3,400-ish. We're not going to be able to bring all of those in because we're going to have to measure against, the public health concern and the capacity in the building. But we also need to make sure that we're grabbing those kids for more face-to-face instruction when there is no remote equivalent for them, or even a remote Band-Aid or a remote option.
Yes, ma'am, of course. And, Ms. Varnum, so I've talked with, several parents. We've been hearing from a lot of the parents, the entire community, with the recent FAQ, surveys, and then we've developed the FAQs and, trying to get this information out here with Facebook Live, of course, as well. But, one of the questions that we're also hearing is, with no in-person instruction allowed, how will the needs of students who actually struggle with remote learning be addressed?
Yeah. So that's a great question. Thanks, Brandon.
Yes, ma'am.
I think what we're finding right now is many of our parents, our families, our caregivers are needing additional supports. For one, we really want to provide some self-care supports, some hang in there kind of supports, but certainly those who are having to help facilitate instruction for students with significant disabilities, or even, disabilities at all. And so, I know that there's a serious frustration along with this, and we have to remember, and so we'll have to remind ourselves and those around us who are in the same situation that the instruction we're having right now is to give the best we can at this time, but we're going to have to engage in some recovery efforts. So for some students, there's going to need to be an IEP meeting to talk about, this is not just a location change. This is a complete game changer in what special education looks like, feels like, smells like. And, this might mean a teacher is on the phone with a parent, really helping them walk through some of the academic tasks or instructional tasks. It might mean the student is doing a live instruction, but it's not with a group, it's more one-on-one. It might mean that, we're dropping off materials on the front door and, moving away from the door and saying, okay, I hope you got this. I'll call you in a little bit, and really walk through the materials. And so there might be additional parent supports or additional student supports that are in place right now that can be phased away, or that can fade out when we're able to return to a face-to-face instruction, and where we have all the materials and the trained staff right there. So I think, right now we are providing, like I said, the best we can for this time of pandemic, but we just might have to prepare ourselves for some recovery efforts. We're going to need to relearn some of the routines and some of the expectations in our school setting. And for those students who really need a lot of support with self-care, with, with feeding, with toileting, with taking care of themselves, with communication, with mobilizing or mobilization around the building, we're going to need to be doing some reteaching and some recovery time. And then also, we cannot forget about the social emotional impacts of even our most typical students. And what is typical anyway? But, everyone's having a really hard time with the lack of socialization. And some kids are having a hard time with the lack of structure that comes along with an instructional environment like a school setting. And so we will have those recovery efforts. Some of our parents are going to hear their special ed, their EC teachers saying, we need to develop a contingency plan. Let's talk about what we're going to need to do once we can return to try to close the gaps that may have been created during this time. In no way are we pretending that this is not creating gaps. We're just trying to keep the gaps from being bigger than they have to be.
Thank you, Ms. Varnum. You talked about the IEPs and special education of our students who may already have IEPs and 504s established. Can you give us a little bit background on what we're doing as far as evaluations for families who may have been waiting on that IEP or who had appointments set up back in March and are still waiting?
Yeah. So for one, we know that we know that we have to evaluate, and we know that we want to make sure, we know that we want the results to be valid. And so we want to make sure that our students are comfortable when they return to us for these evaluations, that we're careful in assessing them so that we're getting an accurate measure of their abilities and not seeing, well, these are skills that they had 6 months ago, but they don't have now, but they'll bounce back, or this is because of a lack of structure, or these behaviors or, skill issues are just because they haven't been in a routine. So our school psychologists and our other special education staff, who are amazing, by the way, are preparing themselves to return to the evaluations. So we did get information in the last week or so from the Department of Public Instruction, North Carolina's state agency authority for public instruction or public schooling. And we know that as long as we can capture valid and reliable measures, we can go ahead and move forward with one-on-one evaluations. So there are families that are already hearing from our preschool evaluation team and even evaluation teams at schools where we're moving on with those one-on-one evaluations. And so that's going to mean that we're going to take some health precautions. We're going to do the screening, mask wearing. If there's a situation where a mask can't be worn by a student because of the nature of their disability, then we'll have to process through those and figure out what accommodations are appropriate or what modifications to that expectation are appropriate so that we can go ahead and get those needs covered. We also know that for students who were referred for evaluation prior to us having to go completely remote, still need those evaluations completed. And so we might have to use a few different measures because students haven't been in school, but we know that if a student is eligible for special education and is determined to need those services, we're likely going to owe some contingency or compensatory services, meaning that we want to try to make up for lost time. And that's probably going to be the case with many students. And the difficulty is we can't borrow resources from some other place that hasn't experienced this. Everyone nationally and internationally has experienced the same dilemma, that we're kind of behind in providing the educational services that we need to provide for students based on a disability that is ready to be evaluated.
And Ms. Farnham, I think you may have answered some of this already since we've been talking, and that covered some of this as well. But just again, we're still getting some questions coming in and things like that. Will teachers be meeting with families? Will the actual teachers be meeting with the families regarding the IEPs and their specific child needs as well?
Yes. So some students with, like I mentioned, that with IEPs and their services are really just changing location, meaning they were having these, maybe they're in a co-taught English now or English 1 class for 9th grade, and they're still going to have that in co-taught, and the teacher is going to be the special ed teacher is able to support. They might not have an IEP meeting necessarily, but there will be some dialogue about the change in location. For some of our students, their IEP is going to be completely different, or the services can't be provided as written because of the nature of the supports in the IEP. And those families can expect to hear from their special education case manager, their EC teacher case manager, to provide that information on either an invitation to an IEP meeting, or definitely a conference call or a Zoom call to talk about what might need to be considered. So again, if the IEP can't be implemented as written and it's not a minor difference, even if it is a minor difference, parents are going to be contacted. But if there are some really substantive changes that have to occur, those families are going to be invited to participate in an IEP meeting. And if parents are listening and parents are interested, I know they're interested, but if this applies to them, reach out to your school's administration, reach out to your case manager of your child. If you're not sure call who that is, call the school and ask for the special education chairperson and say, my child has an IEP and I'm curious, is there going to need to be an IEP meeting? What are going to be the changes? And I'm really hopeful that many parents have already heard from their child's teacher regarding IEP services. But if you haven't, because we're still counting the enrollments of kids and collecting those who have been participating in their remote instruction. So parents, please reach out. And if you don't know who to reach out to, feel free to call, like I said, call your child's school and ask for your special education chairperson. Talk to your school's principal. And you can also call our main central office number. And I'm going to take a stab at what that is. I think it's 254-4200. Is that right, guys?
That is correct.
Okay.
That will
Okay. I wasn't actually playing. I don't ever call that number, but call the main central office number and ask for special education. And you're going to get somebody on the phone that can help you figure out who you need to talk to for those detailed questions about your child's plan.
Thank you for sharing, Ms. Varnum. And we want to detour the conversation a little bit. And parents, families, certainly if you're on and viewing, if you have additional questions surrounding special education or IEP, please drop them in the chat and we will bring them back up. But we also wanted to allow for conversations regarding health and safety with our school system. So Ms. Varnum, can you talk a little bit about the resources that are available to families to support that social and emotional support that our families, that our teachers, and that our students need during this time?
Yes, thank you for asking that. We know that many of our students require social emotional learning supports no matter what. And we know that on any given good day, many of us and many of our loved ones and those that we care about need mental health support. That's perfectly fine. And we know that right now, mindfulness and self-care is really important. So we had been developing even more social emotional learning plans for students across, all classrooms, all grade levels, all schools. And we decided that we needed to be much more robust in that for the opening of this school year. And so many of our teachers are participating in morning classroom meetings, really assessing self-care, assessing, our approach, our socialization, our emotional well-being. And, we're encouraging our teachers to do the same thing for themselves. And really focusing on some evidence-based practices for supporting that social and emotional well-being of our students. And so we spent some time over the summer providing training for administrators on their self-care and their mindfulness and how they can support their staff, and doing well checks with them, checking in on how we're managing ourselves in this very trying and frustrating time. And it's not just frustrating educationally, it's frustrating in kind of all aspects of life right now. And then just remembering that, we need to take care of ourselves so that we can be there for those that we're serving. This is not, this is not where we just take care of ourselves and move on. This is where we're taking care of others around us. So rolling out social emotional learning materials for our elementary, middle, and high school has been really important. So that at the elementary level, we're talking with kids about understanding their self-regulation, understanding their feelings. What can they do to decrease their anxiety? Same thing with middle school. How do you reach out for support? How do you self-advocate? And at high school levels too, how do you support a friend who might be in crisis? How do we take care of ourselves so we can, help take care of others? And that overall emotional well-being is essential to our readiness for instruction. And so, I think we'll continue to see growth in this area, but I'm trying to find some silver linings to this really difficult time. And I think that, one, we're becoming much more comfortable connecting with people, not in a face-to-face way, but finding connections in like this, a digital and virtual way. And I think we're also finding a need for instruction for social and emotional well-being and social emotional skill building that we might not have prioritized as much in the past, but many of our kids really need it.
I know last year we rolled out the Say Something app. Can you talk a little bit to that?
Absolutely. I was thinking of that. It came in my head when I was thinking about especially middle and high school kids and really supporting somebody with a crisis. The Say Something app is a tool that was provided for us from the state level. And it really provides middle and high school kids with an anonymous option to reach out for help for themselves or to ask for help for another person. And the Say Something app is connected to our 911 dispatch center, but it's also connected, prior to that, it's connected to counselors, mental health counselors and crisis support counselors who are there ready to text back in the app. So they don't get the kid's phone number and start connecting with them that way. But somebody can reach out in the app, and if they provide their contact information, or their name and information like that, that's one thing. But the messages go back and forth in the app to offer support. So if they're saying, I was just texting with my friend, or I just saw an Instagram story or whatever, and I'm concerned about my friend's well-being, and I don't know how to contact their family. I don't know, their parents' number or whatever, but my friend needs help and I'm worried about my friend. Then, that's when the crisis counselors can say, okay, well, what information do you have? Can you tell us who, the name of your friend? And then that also connects with some of us in student support and administration. And it says, okay, there might be a very serious and urgent emergency life safety threat. And they'll reach out to us at the district level. I mean, I get these texts anytime. It might come in the middle of the night, and there's several of us that get those. And so we can identify what school is this kid in. But if the school is already identified, it can go to the principal and the school counselor. And so we can provide that support. And if it's a life safety alert, we do reach out through the 911 dispatch center to get law enforcement involved if they need to do a well check. Or we will help identify contacts for getting in touch with the parents and making sure that they're aware and that they're with their child. And then it moves on from there to be able to provide case management resources or urgent resources to really support in crisis situations.
Excellent, Ms. Farnham. A lot of good information there for our parents and the entire community, really. What can parents start doing now to prepare students for Plan B?
Yeah, absolutely. For one, pay attention to our social media feed. You guys, this team of folks on our communication team, have been really busy trying to collect videos and informational sessions to give parents a better idea of what to expect, so that you can have conversations with your kid about, how's it going to be different when you get on the bus and then get off the bus at the school? How's it going to be different when you hop out of the car? First, we need to prepare our kids for what's going to happen with screening. We had some informational videos out on our social media. Maybe we'll loop those back through, but certainly look for those on what does screening look like when you get to school? What does screening look like when you get to the school bus, when you're at the bus stop and you start to board the bus? We also, and I'm going to take a moment to remind parents that if your child's going to be at a bus stop, please make sure an adult or an adult caregiver, a responsible adult parent, somebody waits with your child so that we can make sure that we can screen them and get them on the bus. But if they don't screen to be able to get on the bus because there might be some symptoms or some exposure, we do not want to leave a kid alone. And we don't want to have to be faced with the choice of, okay, do I put this kid, potentially your child, on the bus and they're sick? Or do I really, really wish there was an adult standing there? So let's be prepared for that, number one. Also, being prepared that if you're going to be driving your kid to school, the car drop off is going to have to be, it's going to have to become more efficient. We're planning for that. We don't want parents to have to wait, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes to get for screening to happen, but we're probably going to have to practice a little bit and get the car line to go quickly. But we want to screen kids, especially asking parents the screening questions and doing that quick temperature check before kids get out of the car. We don't want to have to check their temperature at the door and call you back and you're like, I just got out of this car line. And so we want to make sure that we're doing this in tandem and supporting your transportation needs and your time and efficiency. We want parents to, if you're out in public with your kid, reminding them about the mask wearing, helping them understand how to appropriately wear the mask. I didn't bring a mask into my home office with me, but, making sure your mask covers your nose and your mouth. And we are going to, we had a health work group meeting this afternoon, and we're going to be working on some mask hygiene videos so that kids know how to take care of their mask. You don't want to take your mask down and lay it flat down on a surface that could be dirty and unsanitary. How to hang on to your mask and so you don't confuse it with somebody else's. That defeats all the purposes. Also, when you're in a grocery store or you are in any other place of business, if you see the directional signs that say, one-way traffic here, focus on, practicing that. No, this arrow on this floor means we're all going this way. So we're not facing each other like in a grocery store line. We want to make sure that I have an awesome husband who's watching, and he just brought me a mask and just threw it to me. So we want to make sure that they're following the directional patterns, because when they get into the school setting, they're going to see that these arrows say everybody goes this way. And, talking with one of our high school assistant principals today, he was like, our building is arranged in pods. We might have that everybody comes out of this classroom and everybody goes right. So you don't go left, even if your classroom is right next door to the left. Everybody goes right and goes around. But I'm going to demo this mask. So we have to make sure we're wearing our masks over our nose and our mouth. And when you take them off, use the ear loops, because you don't really want to be touching the inside of your mask. And you also want to fold it so that you protect the inside if you need to lay it on a surface. It's also good to tissue or a napkin if you want to lay it on a table that somebody else has been using. But either way, you want to keep it folded so the inside is protected. We'll do videos for that. But anyway, I had my mask, so I needed to use it.
That's great. Those are great tips. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. We just had a question come in the chat that I wanted to get to before we move on. Are there any resources available for students or families who may be with hurricane season coming up, who may be traumatized from past hurricanes? I know for me, particularly our most recent hurricane, it was a lot stronger than what I thought. So what resources are available for our families and students?
I'm so glad you asked that. And I know I say that for every question, but I'm really glad you're asking all of these. For one, we definitely have our school-based mental health supports up and running. And we are, the more we have our health precautions in place, we will begin having students coming in for one-on-one school mental health supports. And, also with our WHAT clinics, our Wilmington Health Access for Teens clinics run by Coastal Horizons in our high schools. And so we want to make sure that our students who have any kind of mental health needs still have those services provided. So many of our school-based mental health therapists are reaching out to kids to make those connections. If they've already met with them and already done intake, they're probably been doing some teletherapy or telemedicine. But for those that didn't and might need some supports, please contact your school. And if you aren't sure if you've got the mental health supports at your school, which we have plenty in serving many of our schools, we also have school counselors and school social workers. So we have supports in every school. But if you're not sure how to access those, again, please call the 254-4200, the main central office administration building, and ask for student support, because our staff and student support are going to be ready to support in connecting families, parents, kids to the right mental health supports. Because we know that, yes, and I'll agree, Caress, I think that storm was stronger than we anticipated. We know that grounding ourselves and taking care of ourselves and being prepared is going to be the best thing to support our social, emotional, and mental health needs. And sometimes people just need to talk it out on how to kind of clear their head to get some of those things done. And so we don't create additional anxiety.
Definitely. All right. So it looks like we only have a little bit of time left, not too much time left here, Ms. Varnum. Those are excellent resources and, that we provided tonight, and a lot of good questions that our viewers have sent us, parents in the community. This one we have as well. It says, what new safety procedures can students and families expect under Plan B when we return to face-to-face learning? We covered some of that, but is there anything else that folks need to know?
Yeah. So as far as safety precautions, so for one, students wearing masks and staff wearing masks, and to really be prepared for that. There are some exemptions and some asides to this, but I'm gonna kind of speak to the main road first. Mask wearing is essential for the entire school. And all the students and the staff, and that's on the school grounds, that's in the school. And there are a couple of times where, of course, you're not going to be wearing your mask. So for one, when you're eating, and we're not planning to be eating right away in our cafeteria, we'll be eating in smaller groups in our classrooms. The other thing is if you're engaging in strenuous physical activity, so you're outside and you're running, and that's not going to be a good time to have a mask on. So we're spending a lot of time talking in the health work group, talking about what are the protocols for wearing masks and how do we make sure when we're offering mask breaks, because we really want to offer mask breaks, how do we make sure that we're maintaining mask hygiene? And how do we also make sure that we're not loosening the importance or the concentration on wearing masks? So, we don't want to just say, well, look, if you're 6 feet away from somebody, just take your mask off for a little bit. That's not going to be a good idea, because we need to make sure that our students have a structured time to understand when it really is okay not to wear the mask. And so talking about, are these going to be breaks that are very deliberate, where you go into this little, you've got a circle marked on the floor, and that's your circle, and it's your home base, and it's your zone. And, or maybe you're sitting on your carpet square or your yoga mat or whatever, and you're taking a break. And we know that we're going to do some mindfulness activities and some breathing activities, and that'll be our mask break. But for middle and high school kids, it might also mean that, we've got the supervision during outdoor time, and kids are outside and they're going to be maintaining distance and reminded of that. And when they know they're 6 feet away, and especially outside, just taking a few minutes with your mask off and breathing in some good air and keeping that 6 feet, maybe doing some laps, walking around. If you want to run, that's fine. But making sure we're doing it in a really careful way. We do not want to relax the importance of mask wearing, because we honestly want to be able to come back to school and not yo-yo back and forth. We want to be able to minimize and really kind of mitigate the risk of any kind of transmission or exposure at school. So whenever it's going to happen, when somebody gets sick, when somebody is tested positive for COVID-19, we want to, just like we've been able to do with the staff, be able to double check, okay, were they all wearing their masks? Were they maintaining the 6 feet? Were we washing our hands? If we're able to show that we've especially been wearing our masks, then we aren't creating exposures per public health, and we don't have to clear out pods or clear out staff for 10 days or students for 10 or 14 days. So we want to make sure we don't relax it, but so much, because we want to stay in school, because we need to get back in and stay in, because we've got some recovery efforts, as I talked about in the beginning.
So you talk about, you touched a little bit on students getting sick at school. What are parents going to be looking at if their child is sick at school? What are isolation rooms going to look like, and what are the procedures for dealing with that?
Mm-hmm. So I'll take an opportunity right now to say how thankful I am in this role of partnering with public health for the provision of our school nurse services. Number one, we are in a really good spot by having public health school nurses in our schools. And those folks are they're our public health expert in the building for every building. So number one, we have that. Number two, every school is planning and has already identified their isolation spaces. So if a child comes in and let's say they're a walker to school or a bike rider, and so they didn't come onto it, or they came on a bus. Let's say they also came on a bus. And so we screen and realize there are symptoms here, whether it's a fever or whether they share that they've been around someone else that's sick, or whether they've got some symptoms at this point. And we have an isolation space so that with supervision, with staff supervision, and we'll move to that area and then call parents or other emergency contacts and caregivers to come and get the student. But we'll also have the school nurse involved so that they can double check and say, okay, well, yes, but since you came in from outside, you've kind of cooled down a little bit. This might've been anxiety, oh, well, your mom already, your parent already emailed me and said that you did have a sinus infection. I already know about that, whatever. So the school nurse is going to be able to get involved and kind of tease out any that, might lead to, over exclusion. But in general, we're going to want to make sure that those kids who aren't well are not at school. We still want to be able to support them with their instruction, but just not at school. So every school has the isolation space. The other thing is, we want to make sure that we're doing the screening, like I mentioned, at the car line, so we can say to parents, there's actually a temperature, so you're going to need to go. But the school nurse is going to be operating some tracing and tracking. So if students have had to be out, we're going to have, teams following up with those and really trying to track and monitor as soon as someone can be back in the building. The other thing I wanted to mention a minute ago and forgot to, as far as other safety precautions, because you reminded me with the isolation spaces, sometimes in the classrooms, we might find that student desks can be connected a little together right now and not completely far apart. And we might have some clear screens. And so students might be able to interact with clear screens in between them so that they can have more peer-to-peer learning and not completely eliminate that and everybody be further away. So just expect to see maybe clear screens when you come into the office and slide papers, through a little box as opposed to everybody being connected. Also reminding our kids, this is not going to be the kind of return we usually have where we're hugging each other and holding hands and skipping around. I mean, it's going to be different, but I think we can prepare ourselves so that we can come back together and not have to maintain remote learning for any longer than we have to.
Yes, definitely, Ms. Farnham. Well, time for only one more question. So if a child does get sick, during the school day, if the child is sick during the school day, when it comes to, the children being in the classroom all together and things like that, what are some of the steps, what will be taken? I mean, we've talked a little bit about this already, but just the parents to kind of help ease their minds, what will be done if a child is sick in the class?
Okay. So do you mean a child showing symptoms or maybe a child that tests positive?
Perhaps they're showing some symptoms in the class.
Okay. So as a part of screening, we've got plenty of screening protocols and we've trained our screeners on these, but we also have protocols for supporting our staff, which is, one of the things we're having to do right now, as soon as we can get instruction rolling, supporting our staff and identifying the symptoms so they know who they can reach out to. And so let's say I'm a second grade teacher and well, let's be real about it. I was an elementary special ed teacher. So let's say I've got little Caress in my class, and she and Brandon have been sitting 6 feet away from each other. They're not too close. But anyway, beginning to, show some symptoms, maybe coughing, maybe says my throat hurts, that kind of thing. We also know that kids get sick, right? And this is, coronavirus doesn't happen in a vacuum. We still have other things going on. So I might reach out to my school nurse. I might send an instant message or grab my classroom phone and reach out and say, so Caressa's not feeling well. I do feel like somebody might need to check her out. And so somebody's probably going to come down to the classroom and escort Caressa so that she doesn't wander in places she doesn't need to go, and kind of finding the school nurse. And potentially go into the isolation space and talk with her about, well, how do you feel? What do you think's going on? And it might be important for her to remain in the isolation area until somebody can come and get her. And then we're going to talk with the family about, have you noticed these symptoms? Did they just come on today? Has anybody else been sick? And really provide some support around that. We don't want to be dramatic about it. We don't want to, say, oh my God, crisis. We want to be calm about it, because we don't want to panic Caress either. That could affect her breathing. So we want to make sure that we're supporting and being really realistic about, okay, if we don't know what it is, let's make sure that what tools, mom or dad or grandma or aunt, that what tools you have so that you can make sure Caress is ready to come back to school as soon as possible. And we'll continue to check in with you. And then that teacher is going to still follow up with instructional materials. Let's say Caress has to be tested, and she's got to be out while we're waiting for the results, and then it comes back negative. She returns to school. Let's say Caress tests positive, and we're going to have every hope that her symptoms are minimum, and she's going to spend the time out. And because she's had symptoms, she's once her symptoms are over and she's had a couple of days, 3 days without any fever, and her symptoms have improved, then we're going to be ready for her to return.
Thank you so much, Ms. Varnum, for being with us this evening. We are unfortunately out of time. I do want to let our viewers know that we will be doing this during the 7 o'clock hour in partnership with Latino Alliance this evening, and that session will be in Spanish. Additionally, next week we come back with part 3 of our series, where we have Assistant Superintendent of Operations, Mr. Eddie Anderson, and he will be with us then to talk about transportation, child nutrition, and facilities. So thank you again, guys, for viewing. Thank you, Ms. Varnum, for being here. And of course, Brandon, thank you for co-hosting with me. We hope you guys have a wonderful evening. Take care.
See ya.